so excited to have these three gentlemen here for a number of reasons. One, I chatted with all of them last night and they have lots of interesting things to tell us. But number two, I think just really what it represents. When I think of my own professional society, and I suspect that many of you think the same, you don't exactly see the fit right away. A lot of our societies, certainly in the past, have been pretty conservative, pretty rigid about what they do and don't touch. So I think it's just a wonderful testament that you all are here. So thank you. So on my left, I have Michael Hodgkims, the CMIO from the AMA. We have John Rumsfeld in the center, CIO at the American College of Cardiology. And then Eric Muehlbauer on the end, CEO of the North American Spine Society. So I'll let each of them tell you a little more about what these societies are, and then we'll get into some good Q&A. So Michael, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. First of all, my background is in internal medicine, practiced for about 10 years, and then spent the next 20 or so years in the health information technology space in a series of mostly startups before joining the AMA 6 years ago as its chief medical information officer. And I'm sure a lot of you have perceptions of the American Medical Association that date back decades. I can tell you that we were talking about this last night, that up until the time I joined the AMA, my general opinion was that it wasn't particularly relevant and I wasn't a member. I hope through the discussion this morning that you'll learn some things that will change your view of who the American Medical Association is.
Hi everybody, John Rumsfeld. I'm a cardiologist and professor of medicine at the University of Colorado and have taken on this role as Chief Innovation Officer at the American College of Cardiology. The ACC's mission is actually to transform cardiovascular care and improve heart health. That's it. That's the entire mission. And starting about 2 years ago, we launched a fairly ambitious innovation agenda. The entire board, the entire organization is now against that mission of transforming care. So we are now all in, sort of at the arrow tip, rather than following in the wake of what happened with the electronic health record, for example. We are all in on, can we lead, facilitate, and even partner and co-create with the tech world, with the startup world, with other organizations to actually transform care. We're taking a very aggressive tact on that. The ACC itself is a global organization. It's about 53,000 members. Yes, cardiologists, but also nurses, PAs, nurse practitioners, and cardiovascular administrators. We have 40 international chapters, and we have over 80 million clinical records in our clinical registry programs, which we're trying to bring to bear as we partner around things like digital health and artificial intelligence. So it's a different world than it used to be, I think, in the professional organization world, or at least we're trying to push it that way, and look forward to working with many of you.
Eric?
Yeah, I'm Eric Muehlbauer. I'm not an MD. I have a law degree instead of a medical degree. Also went to Harvard Business School. I've been at NAS for 23 years. And it's interesting, we've got 3 different size societies. Also, we're probably the 3rd generation. First generation, American Medical Association, American College of Surgeons, very big, broad. And then about 100 years ago, you had all the specialty societies grow up. Well, we're the 3rd generation. We don't necessarily care what your specialty is. What we care is what you do. So in order to become a member of NAS, you have to spend 50% or more of your time in spine care. We've got about 75% of our members are surgeons. Orthopedic surgeons is about 50%. Neurosurgeons about 25%. The rest are PM&R docs, anesthesiologists, pain management, etc. We have about 9,000 members in about 70 countries. And we're very active with AMA, with CPT, RUC. I'm writing a book on medical device development right now. I've been studying this for 2 to 3 years now. And just when I think I've got it ready to go to editing, I come to a meeting like this, and I have to write 2 more chapters.
So I shared with Michael last night, my former opinion of the AMA was a little stronger than irrelevant and a little more negative. But we're seeing great things happen, so I may even join again. It's possible. It's possible. So that's a lead in to the question really for all of you is what is the role of your societies in what we are doing here in innovation in general? How do we better engage your members? And how do we engage other societies that we may consider irrelevant or worse, but maybe changing and we don't know about it?
Well, the AMA, we have something that we call our innovation ecosystem. And I was thinking about comments by Dr. Halverson yesterday, where, basically at a campus, they've incorporated the things that we deal with virtually in our innovation ecosystem. And it really consists of 4 Ps, and those are partnerships, policies, programs, and products. And and those are things that we share with what we refer to as the House of Medicine. Of course, the AMA membership itself is about 230,000, give or take. It's continued to grow slowly over the past several years. But twice a year, as my colleagues know, we convene the House of Delegates. And the House of Delegates, we bring together about 1,000 people representing all the specialty societies, all the state medical societies, regional societies, as well as special interest groups. And in those meetings, which go on for several days, one of the topics of discussion that is most uppermost in the participants' minds is what's happening in the world of digital health, digital medicine, telemedicine, connected health. There are so many names for this that it sort of begins to blur a bit as you look at it. But obviously, a lot of interest in the electronic health record and the direction that will take and how we can influence it. But probably the most prominent thing that we've done to promote innovation is we actually established a separate company a few years ago called Health 2047, which is based in Silicon Valley. And the mission of Health 2047 is to really tackle the really complex systematic problems in healthcare. The AMA made an initial investment in that entity of $15 million. That entity just spun out a separate company that's been called Akira. But it's really a company that's developing a blockchain-based platform that's tailored to health information exchange. And the AMA made a follow-on investment in that company of about $10 million, and there are strategic investors that are joining as well. So in our world today, we're partnering with a wide variety of companies. We're partnering with health systems, we're partnering with health plans, we're partnering with technology companies, a variety of them. IBM is a company that we've been partnering with recently. We've partnered with some of the EHR vendors. But we're also working with folks like Smart, Smart on Fire, up in the Boston area. Smart is basically developed a platform for plug-and-play applications with EHR. So rather than relying on EHR vendors to solve the problems that physicians have with their EHRs, Smart has developed a mechanism for people to develop plug-and-play applications that can interact probably through a FHIR API with any EHR to augment, supplement, or even take the place of the user interfaces. So we're a participant there as well. So there are a variety of things that we're doing in the innovation space to promote that innovation, and we do that very much in conjunction with really the entirety of the House of Medicine.
It's great. It's great. John, Eric, how can we engage your members, we at AngelMD or in the innovation community, and why should we?
So, well, great question. So I think when we have this tremendous conundrum we have to address here, which is we have extremely high-tech medical care, and cardiology is probably a prime example of where new medical technologies come in. We adopt them immediately. We're tech-avid. And yet our healthcare delivery system is still in a Department of Motor Vehicles mode, all right? And so we have this conundrum between high-tech medical care and low-tech healthcare delivery. And so we're really need this digital transformation that has happened in so many other sectors. And I think what we've realized is not only is it not really working or happening despite the investment and despite the advances in technology, but it's actually, you heard this morning from the speakers about, it's actually making it difficult. There's a lot of burnout, there's a lot of frustration with electronic health records and other things. And so I think what we're saying is, wait a minute, we actually have the clinical enterprise here, not one practice at a time, not one hospital at a time, but think of it horizontally here. If we work with, and we do, all of the cardiologists in the US and around the world, and all of their practices, and all of the hospitals where we get data from all those hospitals, we also work closely with the FDA and the payers. Are we not in a centerpiece here where we could partner across that and directly with startup companies and other tech companies and say, let's go at this together? Because what if we have that network where we could potentially rapidly evaluate and assess how to integrate the technology into care? The technology itself, digital, nobody believes in it more than all of us, right? It can enable transformation. It doesn't cause transformation. It's going to have to be integrated into care, how it's going to change workflow, and yes, evolve how we deliver care, sure, but we're still going to have to integrate it in and deal with things like the FDA and payment. And I just don't see how we do that if we don't do it together. So to loop back to your specific question is, I think we can and should leverage organizations like the AMA, the ACC, Spine, and others if they're ready. And I hope these organizations are, and others start to come along in the so-called House of Medicine. If we're ready to partner and do this, why wouldn't we lead it together? And I think that's what we're trying to do. We've actually launched multiple partnerships over the last 18 months, including co-creation, even starting company with a startup company. So we're trying to go into this new area here.
Well, NASA's mission is to improve spine care through education, research, and advocacy. We have a very strict ethics program, and so we have had kind of an off and on relationship with industry over the last probably 5 to 10 years. The Spine Journal is the #1 journal in spine. It's published some controversial things about products that have been developed, and there might have been a conflict of interest with some of the authors, et cetera, undisclosed. So what we're after is a transparency. We want people to have these relationships, but we want them to understand the ethics rules behind them. Is they have to disclose it. Doesn't mean that they're any less credible than anybody else. It just patients need to know this, your colleagues need to know this, and everybody comes at these things from different perspective. One of the things that I think NASA has been very successful at is development of our relationship with payers, with CPT. Since we're multi-specialty, we're a natural bridge builder between neurosurgery, orthopedic surgery, PM&R, anesthesia, et cetera. So if we take on an issue at CPT or with payers, we have, the stakeholders are all together, and we go and we present a united front with the Neurosurgeon Society, with Orthopedic Society, with PM&R. So we're a natural leader because we have the leaders of these other organizations are part of our group. We wouldn't get paid attention to by the payer community if we didn't have credibility. And our ethics program gives us tremendous credibility. So we also review payer policies all the time, but it was getting too cumbersome. So about 2 years ago, we decided, what would we do if we were an insurance company? What would reasonable coverage policies be? So we started writing coverage recommendation policies proactively. And we will do this for everything from fusion surgeries that have been around for years to something relatively new, which is sacroiliac joint fusions. And so we are helpful with the startup companies when it comes to that side, because we can help grease the skids with the paying community. And one of the things that I'm discussing in the book I'm writing is that a lot of times the research that the startup companies do is focused on the early issue, which is getting over the FDA hurdle. But you really have to focus on reimbursement. Because if you do a study that just gets over that legal bar, law can be described as minimally acceptable behavior, right? Ethics is completely opposite. But if you want to get reimbursed, they have a different criteria. FDA criteria is safe and effective. insurance criteria is reasonable and necessary. There's a disconnect. So you have to do the best study you can to get over the clinical or the hurdle at the FDA, but you got to keep your eye on that reimbursement, the payer on the back end.
So to that point, we had a discussion last evening about this, and I think, John, you said, but you have to consider that third leg, right? So we have the FDA, we have the payers, but what about the healthcare delivery organization, and what is their criterion?
Right. So where I think we get back, or maybe we get a little stuck here, is when we're talking about digital health overall, and people are saying, why isn't that leading to digital transformation the way we're delivering care? We tend to focus a lot on the technology, which is great and it's necessary, but what we are under appreciating half the time is that it's probably at least half the story or less, which is you're going to have to go into the context of the healthcare delivery system, even as you evolve it to new models, even as we become virtual, even as we get away from episode-based care, even as we get into predictive or proactive care. Still, you're going to have to bring it in, embed it there, and you're still going to have both the regulatory and the reimbursement legs of those stools lined up. And I think it's because we haven't thought about that holistically and what partnerships you need to think about that holistically, that it's no wonder that the digital health world has struggled. We also have one other thing coming in here, is we tend to talk about the digital health world and the medical device world. Those are coming together, as you know, as increasingly medical devices are being seen as digital solutions. So we implant a device, but it's going to have layered in analytics with AI to predict events, and also a platform for monitoring of those patients remotely. So as we bring the digital worlds together, we're going to have to think about the context in which they're delivered, the payment, and then we're also going to have to talk about what levels of evidence we need to deploy these in care. In healthcare, you're not going to take it as a solution and just buy it. I think that's also the thing, going hospital to hospital and trying to sell these is just a straight uphill battle. What we need to do is make at least a flat thing we're trying to do together, and the only way we're going to do that is by saying, what are we trying to solve? The technology can take us this far. What's the context in which it goes in, and how do we triangulate both the regulatory and the reimbursement? And I just think you can't do that alone. And we can't do it alone. ACC cannot do it alone. We have the clinical enterprise, we have the scientific enterprise, but we don't have the tech skill and knowledge, and we need to go together after the regulatory and the payment.
Yeah, I think we're seeing such a positive, right? When you just said we can't go it alone, that's music to my ears, because I think we all know that many of us in our own societies have been going it alone and liking it that way for way too long. So I think it's really great that we're all having this conversation and that we're all moving toward that digital transformation. But having been part of this uphill digital transformation in healthcare climb for many years now, while I'm encouraged, I'm still really frustrated, and clearly there are still a lot of barriers. So I wonder if maybe we could look at what you all see as those barriers to transformation from the perspective of your society's membership.
Well, let me start by saying that, what the imperative is, and the imperative is that you can't manage chronic disease in the clinic. I hope nobody disagrees with that. If you're a surgeon, it's a different issue. But if you're an internist, pediatrician, or other primary care physician, you probably have come to appreciate the fact that seeing a patient, every 3 months or 6 months or annually is not going to solve the problem of improving health outcomes in chronic disease. So that's the given that you start from. And then, so what are the obstacles to achieving that? Well, we all know the usual schema of regulatory, legal, payment, and other obstacles, but and those are all important and need to be addressed, and it takes collective effort. But I would also advance that there are a lot of solutions in search of problems instead of, problems in search of solutions. And the only way, I think, to overcome that is to have physicians more directly involved in the dialogue with entrepreneurs and others. So physicians need to be articulating to the entrepreneurial community what problems they need solutions for. And the entrepreneurs need to be engaging with them on an ongoing basis and then crafting solutions that meet the needs of physicians, that meet their needs in terms of practice workflow, team-based care, and other issues. And at the same time, we need people pushing on policy matters to affect the regulatory environment. The people that are setting these regulations have no clue how physicians practice. They have no clue about how healthcare is delivered.
Yeah, well said. Other barriers?
Well, we're all networks. Our folks are our strength, our members. And so what we do all the time is we make connections. So for our annual meeting, we get between 5,000 and 6,000 people. About 500 or 600 of them are what we call CBIs, commercial business interest people. There's 340 companies in our exhibit hall, and a lot of the companies, maybe about 20% nowadays, are companies that are there just to sell to other companies. So we're a forum. The barriers are that there's still some resistance. Some doctors don't want to be involved in industry. They don't want the organizations to do it. So our perspective is good fences make good neighbors. As long as you know the rules, you can get engaged.
I think what I want to add to this is the noise factor for the clinicians, and just it's so hard. I still practice, and when you go in, it's not just the EHR, but it's all of the other things that have come in to play around billing, which the EHR is very good, set up largely do, as was said earlier, all the quality and safety stuff, all with great intent, but there's so much noise that the amount of time that we're spending actually caring for the care and caring of healthcare with our patients continues to shrink, and that's leading to a lot of frustration. My question is, how much of the focus of the technology development is saying, how can we improve that? How do we improve the clinician-patient interface? How do we move it to the right way care should be delivered, which is longitudinally, not episode or clinic-based. It's not about how full the clinic is, it's remote monitoring and how we achieve these. How often are we sitting down together and saying, so if that's the goal, how do we get there? Now, what I find is that we're not technologists. Amazing technology, amazing smart people in the startup and entrepreneurial world. But if you go all the way to having a product or a solution, and then you're just, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, and already trying to sell it, it kind of gets to that, well, the hospitals will figure out how to use it, or the doctors and nurses will figure out how to use it. If that's true, you've already failed, because that means we weren't involved at the beginning and didn't have that back and forth say on what problem we're trying to solve, but also how we're going to integrate it in. Now, we have to restate the barriers of, well, okay, but if we go after that clinician-patient interface, then we're going right after FDA, okay, and we're going to have to navigate that. Yes, I agree, so let's do it together. And then payment model. It has to work in both the current payment model to get going, fee-for-service model, even as value-based models are starting to evolve, sort of stutteringly or whatever. Yes, we're going to have to say, how could it fit in now? And how could it fit in a future model? Let me give a really specific example because this becomes a little too conceptual. Heart failure care. Heart failure is a chronic disease. It should largely be managed remotely and over time, and we should steer our resources only to those patients that need it. Why? We have all this technology. How are we not monitoring and knowing this? Well, right now, there's really not a reimbursement or a payment model for that. As we get into value-based payment models, that should, we hope, open the doors. But even right now, part of the problem is that because we routinely see people back every 3 months in the clinic and keep the clinic full, when patients are getting sick, we often can't even bring them in, and then we send them to an ER or an urgent care, and they get admitted to the hospital. So even under this model, I am still hopeful and confident that if we can work together to have the right digital health platforms, to know when patients are sick, but also when they're doing well. When patients are doing well, why do we bring them in and repeat tests? I haven't the faintest idea. We need to stop doing that.
John, just a minor correction, though, on the reimbursement front. A year ago, the AMA started something called the Digital Medicine Payment Advisory Group, DIMPAG for short. And I didn't even want to go there.
Shocking. I didn't know that.
But the DIMPAG actually just worked with the CPT editorial panel to have some new codes approved.
That's right.
Specifically for remote patient monitoring.
Progress.
And of course, they have to go through the cycle now of being adopted by Medicare, which is pro forma. But we're slowly making progress in the payment schema to deal with that.
Great. We're going to get beyond just preventing readmissions, right? It's going to
sure
happen.
hope so.
So on that note, we'll open it up for questions. Thank you all.
Wendy, the panel, so I still practice medicine just like a lot of folks in this room. And one of the things that has come about is that, so I went to medical school in the 80s, okay, 1980s, not 1880s. But back then, I remember clearly that we were all taught, it's grandma coming in to see her doctor. That's what it was. It's grandma coming to see her doctor. And over the years, as this has evolved, that seems to become less important and less, and really we've gone away from it, further and further away from it. John brought up a good point. The medical record is a classic example. When we were writing paper notes, another doctor could come in and look at that note and glean information from it. That's what it was for. Then it became a legal document.
Yep.
And now we could have less capability of gleaning information. And now I work with Epic at Hodgkims, and when I read a note, when I'm asked to see a patient, I have no freaking idea what's going on. No, seriously, this is terrible. I'm not being facetious.
No, yeah.
I'm not being facetious. Look to see where the chief complaint is. Look where see where the clinical plan is. It's nowhere there. It's always on the garbage about how we're gonna bill. So we're getting further and further away from what we really want, which is to take care of our patients one-on-one. And I hear about tech. Look, I'm a techie myself and all this. But my concern is that the more we talk about this problem, we're being drawn further away. Now, I have a disclosure to make to you guys. This is not lost also on the government. My wife is the deputy chief medical officer at CMS. All right? And so when she zeroes in on this, she is a geriatrician. She sees the same thing we do. But how, you guys are leaders, how do we get back to where we started? That's really what I'm asking. At the end of the day, we can talk about all this stuff. But ultimately, what we want to do is still take care of grandma and give her the gift. And it is important. I mean, we can't do this digitally and remotely. You have to hold grandma's hand and talk to her. No joke. Even to this day, laying hands is a big deal. And I think our colleagues will appreciate that. So I'm coming back to the panel and asking you, how can we get back to where we started? Because we have really one drift.
So I'll take the first shot. I'll say, first of all, 100% agree, and half, just like most things in life, half the problem is knowing what the problem is, and you just said what the problem is. How do we get back to the care and the caring, but now utilize tech to help us do it in the current world we live in? I think there's no doubt that the digital transformation of healthcare so far has been digital disruption so far. And as long as we recognize that, we're going to have to push reset. Do I know exactly how? No, but we're committing personally and the organization to doing that. And I hate to say it, but I think we're going to kind of have to go at it again from scratch. I think we're going to have to go back and say, wait, what if we leverage the tech, knowing we want to make things more efficient, yes, because we know healthcare costs, and knowing we want to make things better, primarily for patients and their families, but also for the clinical enterprise. All right, so now let's design it that way from the beginning. And I have a feeling, to Ray De La Vecchia's point earlier today, we may have to kind of get rid of some of these things that have just been piled on. I don't see how else it's going to work.
It seems like a focus issue, like the previous speaker. We're focused on filling out the paperwork, not treating patients, and so we just...
That's forced, of course.
Yeah.
It does. Another question?
Yeah, they're going the complete opposite. The millennials and probably 5 billion people in the world that aren't in the U.S. and Europe and Canada, they're going to be mobile first. They'll never have a bank. They'll never have this, that. They'll buy whatever. They won't have a reimbursement. They won't be regulated. How are we kind of looking at this? The people that are already transformed rather than the ones that are within the system today.
Well, and this picks up too on the earlier question. There's no one-size-fits-all solution to this, right? You've got to accommodate, a wide spectrum of interests, of preferences. Somebody in the telehealth panel that you were on yesterday, I mean, you were talking about offering convenience and not having to travel, hours to a appointment of 10 minutes where you barely get a word in edgewise. But then there's always grandma who, sees that appointment as a social event as much as a medical event, and there's therapeutic value there. So, we're not talking about a one-size-fits-all solution. The EHRs are not going to get us there. I mean, my prediction, the EHR vendors hate me to say this, is that in the next 5 to 10 years, the EHRs are just going to be a database. They're not going to be a user interface.
I think it's a database.
They're going to be one data. Pardon me?
It's a database today, isn't it?
Well, and but it's also a user
questionable
interface.
data
It's also a
validity, yeah.
user interface, and and it's questionable data at best. It's certainly not a complete picture of patients because it only describes their illness. It doesn't describe their health and other factors that are equally important. But it'll just be one source of data that'll be overlaid by much more user-friendly ways of interacting, not only with that source of data, but many other sources of data that we're missing today.
One more, Joe.
I love having you guys here. But my bona fides first. I've been a non-interrupted member of the AMA since 1979. I'm a senior member of the American College of Surgeons, 4-time board-certified member of the American Board of Urology. So I like organized medicine. But we're talking about solutions. What are the obstructions? That's what you're not talking about. Who controls CPT codes? AMA controls CPT codes. I've been to your panel. It's a dog-eat-dog world to get a CPT code through on new technology and new innovation because you're always trying to balance the financial interests of your members. I understand that, but you control CPT. Government, HIPAA. You want all this interoperability, you want transparency, but you're not supposed to talk about anything about patient care. The government is at fault. So we have organized medicine, we have the federal government, industry. Why are you all afraid of industry? You all want all this stuff to be done, but you're so afraid of the legal implications of self-interest. There are always going to be bad apples. There always have been, there always will be.
Yeah.
There are shark oil salesmen, there are always going to be people who maneuver the system. We have allowed these obstructions to really define why we can't get over these hurdles. And I suggest, respectfully, and I'm looking at myself as a member of all these organizations, that a lot of it falls on us, that we have allowed this obstruction to occur. We have allowed the EMR fiasco that's occurred. We have allowed the lack of interoperability because we have not taken the lead. That's simple. Your comments.
Well, I mean, I won't go down the CPT rabbit hole. We can have an offline conversation. Although I will say that the reason for the formation of the DIMPAG that I mentioned earlier was to try to expedite new codes in the digital space. So there's a movement in that direction. But I think the other, you're right. I mean, I think physicians were asleep at the wheel when all the CHR stuff was happening, and I think the societies, the associations, assume some responsibility for that. We weren't as proactive as we should have been in managing that process. Of course, we weren't given a lot of opportunity. The government formed a lot of panels. There wasn't one really practicing physician. There wasn't one really practicing physician from the real world on any of those panels. And it was all the big thought leaders in medicine. And, I'm not trying to disparage them, but, they never asked questions about, the 2 and 3 and 4 physician practice or, the dozen physician practice. What is this going to do to you? And we tried desperately to get those voices represented in those discussions, and we were blocked every way we turned. So it's a constant fight. But your premise is, your fundamental premise is absolutely correct. As societies representing physicians, whether from a specialty standpoint or more broadly, we need to be more proactive. And we are engaged in a number of initiatives. The AMA, and OACC is, and SPINE is. In moving in that direction. And if you haven't looked at the AMA website recently, you ought to take a look and see what's going on.
How do you get AMA and its member societies to follow the lead of these guys? Orthopedics,
We're actively in discussion with a number of societies, including ACC, about opportunities for collaboration. So the AMA isn't taking an insular point of view, especially we can, because of that thing that we call the House of Delegates, which actually, people don't realize it's probably the most democratic process in the country because that's where all the policies that the AMA is tasked to pursue are developed. And it's all the specialty societies, state medical societies, and special interest groups.
I get the impression we can continue this conversation for quite some
sorry.
time, and
No,
we
I
can
agree.
certainly do that over the lunch hour, but we need to certainly keep moving. Here's the
Thank you.
panel. These guys were
Thank you.
awesome.